Welcome to the 10th episode of the world-proven conspiracies in history, the Catalan-Aryan Conspiracy of 63 BCE. One must first step into the fog of a city that was suffocating under the weight of its own conquest. Rome in 63 BCE was the capital of the world, a sprawling metropolis of marble and mud, but it was also a city living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The immense wealth flowing in from the conquests of Pompey the Great in the east had not trickled down, it had pooled at the top, creating a class of hyper-wealthy senators while the rest of Italy drowned in debt. The streets were filled with desperate men, veterans of the dictator Sulla who had failed at farming, dispossessed peasants, and ruined aristocrats who had gambled away their inheritances on political campaigns and exotic luxuries. It was a powder keg of resentment, and the man holding the match was Lucius Sergius Catilina, a patrician of ancient lineage who possessed a dark, magnetic charisma that terrified and seduced the soul of the Republic. The cast of characters in this drama represents the final generation of the Roman Republic, giants who would eventually tear the world apart. At the center was Catiline himself, a man described by the historian Sallust as having a mind of vast and crooked ambition, capable of enduring hunger, cold, and lack of sleep like no other, but driven by an insatiable bloodlust. Opposing him was the consul, Marcus Tullius Cicero, a new man from Arpinum, with no aristocratic ancestors, armed only with his golden voice and a desperate need to be accepted by the elite. Hovering in the background were the Titans, Julius Caesar, then a rising pontiff who walked a dangerous line between the conspirators and the state, Marcus Porcius Cato, the stoic conscience of the Senate who demanded blood, and the ghost of the absent Pompey whose return with his legions everyone feared. The victims of this plot were to be the entire Senate, the consul Cicero, and the physical city of Rome itself, which was slated to be consumed by fire to wipe the slate clean. I am Czar, educating the common man about famous conspiracies in our history. If you like my content, kindly like, subscribe, and comment. The conspiracy was not a sudden explosion, but a slow-burning fuse that was lit months before the famous denunciation in the Senate. The date of the crisis spans the latter half of 63 BCE, specifically intensifying in late October and reaching its bloody climax in December. The conspirators planned their masterstroke for the Saturnalia, the festival of misrule in December, a time when the city would be drunk, chaotic, and unguarded. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity and brutality. Catiline's lieutenant, Gaius Manlius, was raising an army of desperate veterans in Etruria, modern Tuscany. Inside the city, the conspirators, led by the sluggish but noble Publius Cornelius Lentulus Sura, a former consul who had been expelled from the Senate for immorality, and the vicious Gaius Cethetus, were to coordinate a wave of arson. They planned to set fire to 12 distinct districts of Rome simultaneously. As the citizens rushed to save their homes, Cethegus would lead a death squad to the house of Cicero and assassinate him. In the ensuing chaos, the gates would be opened, Manlius's army would march in, and the Senate would be slaughtered. Who plotted this nightmare? It was a coalition of the damned. The inner circle consisted of men like Lentulus and Cethegus, senators who had ruined themselves through vice and ambition. They were not bribed by foreign powers. They were funded by their own desperation and the promise of looting the empire they sought to rule. Catiline promised them tabulae novae, clean slates. This was the motive that drove the conspiracy and attracted thousands of followers across Italy. New tablets meant the total cancellation of all debts. To a Roman aristocrat who owed millions of sesterces to moneylenders, this was a promise of resurrection. To the poor veteran starving on a failed farm, it was salvation. The conspiracy was fundamentally a class war, a revolt of the bankrupt against the bankers, of the have-nots against the haves, led by a have who had fallen from grace. Catiline himself was motivated by a twisted sense of dignitas. He had run for the consulship twice and lost twice, defeated by Cicero, whom he viewed as an unworthy immigrant. For a Roman patrician, this political death was worse than physical death. He decided that if he could not rule Rome, he would burn it. The importance of this event in history is staggering because it defined the political vocabulary of the West for 2,000 years. It established the archetype of the state versus the subversive. It raised the eternal question: how far can a free state go to protect itself? Can a government suspend civil liberties, spy on its citizens, and execute them without trial to prevent terrorism? Cicero's handling of the conspiracy saved the Republic in the short term, but doomed it in the long term. By executing citizens without a trial, he shattered the legal norms that held the state together, creating a precedent that would eventually lead to his own exile and death. It also pushed Julius Caesar into the spotlight, revealing his sympathies for the populist cause and setting the stage for the civil wars that would follow. The execution of the conspiracy was plagued by problems because, for all their aristocratic pedigree, the conspirators were incompetent criminals. It was far from perfect execution. It was a comedy of errors masked as a tragedy. The first problem was the leak. Catiline had a co-conspirator named Quintus Curius, a man who could keep neither his money nor his secrets. Curius was having an affair with a noblewoman named Fulvia. When he ran out of money to buy her gifts, he began to promise her mountains of gold and bragging that soon he would be a master of the world. Fulvia, realizing her lover was involved in something terrible, went straight to Cicero's wife, Terentia. Through Fulvia, Cicero had a direct line into the heart of the plot. He knew every meeting, every date, and every target. This allowed him to place guards at his door on the morning Cethegus arrived to assassinate him, turning the killers away and saving his own life. However, knowing the plot and proving it were two different things. The Roman legal system required evidence, not just the word of a consul. Cicero was paralyzed. He knew Catiline was guilty, but he could not arrest a patrician senator on the word of a mistress. He needed a smoking gun. This is where the conspirators made their fatal geopolitical mistake. They tried to recruit foreign allies. There was a delegation of Allobroges in Rome, Gauls from the Transalpine province who were angry about Roman taxes. Lentulus Sura approached them, thinking that since they hated Rome, they would join the revolution. He promised them freedom from debt and autonomy if they provided cavalry for Catiline's army. The Allobroges were barbarians in the eyes of the Romans, but they were politically astute. They realized that a conspiracy of bankrupt aristocrats was a sinking ship. They went to their patron, Fabius Sanga, who went to Cicero. Cicero sought his chance. He told the Allobroges to play along. He instructed them to demand written oaths from the conspirators, letters signed and sealed that they could take back to their people as proof of the alliance. Incredibly, Lentulus and Cethegus fell for the trap. They wrote letters inciting the Gauls to war, signed them with their personal seals, and handed them over. This set the stage for the most dramatic night of the conspiracy, the ambush at the Milvian Bridge. On the night of December 2nd, the Allobroges envoys left Rome with the letters, accompanied by a conspirator named Titus Volturcius. Cicero had sent 2 praetors with a force of armed men to hide in the reeds along the Tiber River at the bridge. As the envoys crossed, the trap was sprung. Swords were drawn, but no blood was shed. The Allobroges surrendered immediately, as planned. The letters were seized. The smoking gun was secured. The outcome of the conspiracy unfolded in the Senate the next day, December 3rd, in the Temple of Concord. This location was symbolic. The temple represented the unity of the Roman people, and Cicero was using it to tear out the cancer that threatened that unity. He summoned the conspirators, Lentulus, Cethegus, Statilius, and Gabinius. They came, arrogant and unsuspecting, believing their alliance with the Gauls was secure. Cicero produced the letters. He asked Lentulus if he recognized his seal, a carving of his grandfather. Lentulus, confronted with the undeniable physical proof of his treason, collapsed. He admitted his guilt. The other conspirators followed suit. The Senate was in an uproar. They voted to place the men under house arrest, a lenient measure that terrified Cicero, who knew that as long as they were alive, their mogs would try to free them. The debate that followed 2 days later, on December 5th, changed the soul of Rome. The question was simple: what to do with the prisoners? Roman law forbade the execution of a citizen without a trial before the people. But Cicero argued that by conspiring against the state, they had forfeited their citizenship and become hostes, enemies of war. The Senate met again in the Temple of Concord. The debate was a clash of titans. Silanus, the consul-elect, spoke first and demanded the ultimate penalty: death. The Senate seemed to agree. Then, a young Julius Caesar stood up. Caesar gave a speech that is still studied today for its cool, terrifying logic. He warned his Senate against acting in anger. He reminded them that the laws of the Republic, specifically the Lex Portia, forbade the execution of citizens. He argued that killing these men would set a precedent that could be used by a future tyrant to kill anyone he disliked. He proposed instead that they be imprisoned for life in Italian towns and their property confiscated. Caesar's speech was so powerful that the Senate began to waver. Even Silanus tried to backtrack, claiming he meant imprisonment when he said ultimate penalty. Then Marcus Porcius Cato rose. Cato was the man of iron. He mocked Caesar's leniency, subtly insinuating that Caesar himself might be involved in the plot, a rumor that dogged Caesar for years. Cato argued that the conspiracy was not a legal matter, but a war. He said, "We are not discussing whether we should have tax farmers or allies. We are discussing our lives and liberties." He painted a vivid picture of the city in flames and the women of Rome violated by Citigus. He demanded immediate execution in accordance with the custom of the ancestors. Cato's fury broke the deadlock. The Senate voted for death. The outcome for the conspirators was immediate and grim. Cicero did not wait for nightfall. He personally led Lentulus from his house arrest on the Palatine down into the Forum, to the Tullianum, the Mamertine prison. This was a hellish, subterranean dungeon at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, described by Sallust as repulsive and terrible from the filth, the darkness, and the smell. It was a hole in the ground that connected to the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer. One by one, the 5 conspirators, Lentulus, Cethegus, Statilius, Gabinius, and Caperius, were lowered into the pit. Inside, the executioners were waiting. They were strangled with ropes. When Cicero emerged from the prison into the twilight of the Forum, where a crowd of the conspirator supporters was waiting to launch a rescue, he uttered a single chilling word: Vixerunt. They have lived, or more accurately, they are dead. The crowd dissolved in terror. The outcome for Catiline himself was a warrior's death. He had fled the city earlier, joining his army in Etruria, but with the execution of his lieutenants in Rome, his support evaporated. His army shrank from 10,000 to 3,000 as the opportunists deserted him. He was trapped near Pistoia by 2 consular armies. In January of 62 BCE, realizing there was no escape, Catiline ordered his men to fight to the death. The battle was ferocious. Sallust tells us that not a single freeborn soldier of Catiline's army was taken prisoner. They all fell where they stood. Catiline himself was found far ahead of his own lines, surrounded by the corpses of his enemies, still breathing, with that same ferocity stamped on his face that he had worn while alive. He died as he had lived, violently, bravely, and entirely opposed to the order of the state. The witnesses to this history faced varied fates. The Alabrages were rewarded by the Senate, but their loyalty bought them little. Their tribe revolted a few years later anyway, crushed by the very state they had saved. Fulvia, the mistress who leaked the plot, vanished from history, likely paid off with the rewards Cicero promised. But the most tragic fate was reserved for Cicero. For a moment, he was the father of the fatherland, pater patriae, hailed as a savior. But the wheel of fortune turned. 5 years later, the populist tribune Clodius Pulcher, an ally of Caesar, passed a law exiling anyone who had put a Roman citizen to death without a trial. It was a law written specifically for Cicero. The savior of Rome was chased out of the city, his house burned to the ground, a victim of the very illegality he had used to save the state. The geopolitical motives and changes after the conspiracy were subtle but deep. The exposure of the plot revealed the rotting foundations of the Roman economy. The debt crisis did not go away with Catiline's death. It festered until Julius Caesar finally addressed it during his dictatorship. The conspiracy also hardened the divide between the optimates, the senatorial elite, and the populares, the supporters of the people. It proved that the Senate could no longer maintain order without the support of a general and his legions. It was the death knell of the civilian government. Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar looked at the chaos of 63 BCE and realized that the Republic was a carcass waiting to be carved up by the strongest sword. What are the physical facts today that make this story undeniable? You can walk into the Forum Romanum today and see the stones that witness the drama. The Temple of Concord is gone, but its massive podium remains at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, the stage where Cicero and Caesar debated the fate of the prisoners. You can visit the Tullianum, Mamertine prison. You can descend the modern stairs into the ancient circular dungeon where Lentulus and Cetagus choked out their last breaths. The air is still damp and heavy there. We also have the speeches themselves. The 4 Catilinarian orations of Cicero are not just literature, they are historical documents, published by Cicero himself to justify his actions. We have the letters of Sallust, a historian who was a contemporary of these men and hated Cicero, yet confirmed the essential facts of the conspiracy. We have the Milvian Bridge, reconstructed but standing on the same piers where the Allobroges were ambushed. And we have the archaeology of Pistoia, where weapons and mass graves from the period suggest the final resting place of Catiline's doomed legion. The Catilinarian Conspiracy was the moment the Roman Republic looked into the mirror and saw its own mortality. It was a conspiracy of the desperate, led by the damned, stopped by a man who believed in the rule of law so much that he broke it to save it. It teaches us that the greatest danger to a state often comes not from the armies at its borders, but from the debts and resentments festering within its own walls. The ghost of Catiline haunted Rome long after his death, a reminder that if the Republic could not provide justice for its debtors, it would eventually provide a fire for its destroyers. I hope you have enjoyed my content as we explore the world's most bizarre and hidden conspiracies. Your love by liking, sharing, and subscribing means a lot to me, and your comments are always welcome. See you in the next episode of The World of Conspiracies. Thanks for watching.